Welcome, fellow believers, to Paranormal M, your destination for all things mysterious. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us as we investigate the inexplicable. Prepare to be enlightened and entertained. Who or what did we see on the trail? Changeling. This encounter's really creeped me out, but especially since yesterday when it developed with my husband's account of a similar experience. I used to be very sensitive as a child, but I lost much of it as I got older. My husband and I have been spending a lot of time in a suburb of the city where my grandparents live. My grandfather is quite elderly and having some mobility issues. One of the perks the location is that we have access to a trail near the house where my husband and I love to run. There is one section of the trail in which I always hate passing through, and it always feels unsettling. It was not until recently that weird things started happening. 1. Several weeks ago we were running. It was starting to get very dark. We were talking and walking. That's when we got to this section and it felt like something icy grabbed my right calf and I felt goosebumps jolt up the right side of my body. 2. Yesterday we were running and I saw a large black shaggy looking animal passing on the trail up ahead in front of us. The closest I could say was that it looked like a large black dog. I felt extremely nervous, like we were in danger. I started urgently saying to my husband, Look, do you see that?" His response was that it was just a cat. When we got to the location on the trail where we saw it go into the trees, we couldn't find anything. Later that night, he explained his reaction. I was not expecting to hear this. Once when he was running alone, he spotted a large black animal on the path in front of him. It appeared to be a large black panther. He was pretty scared, ran back the other way a bit, and then turned around to come back. He's not from this country, so sometimes unfamiliar with native animals. But he knew black panthers don't live here. And when he got to the section on the trail, he found a small black cat, completely different from what he had seen before. Also, he said it was a short-haired breed, and not shaggy as I had seen yesterday. It was in the same section of the trail that I hate, and he felt creeped out as well. I don't have a really good explanation of what this could be right now, but I would like to learn more. Once a few months ago, a bit further up the trail, I met a woman who initiated the conversation, and I felt the same unsafe feeling, but unsure if they could be connected. Blue glowing balls in backyard. I'm wondering if anybody's ever experienced this. When I was about 7 years old living in Connecticut, I was awoken in the middle of the night by my older sister. She said she saw these two glowing blue balls, about 3 feet tall. They were hovering in our backyard. They terrified me. I ran down the hall to my parents' room. My dad saw them as well, went to take his camcorder. Mind you, this was about 1992, so it took him about 10 minutes to get it out of its case and attach the batteries. The balls were still there, and had moved in from in front of mine and my sister's bedroom window to the front of my parents' bedroom window. My dad hit record, and as he did, they zoomed off into the woods incredibly fast. He got nothing on film, so it took a few seconds to start recording. A few years later, my 2 youngest sisters were sharing the same room and had a very similar experience. I was in the room next door to them. They woke me up. We shut all the blinds and hid in the closet, and the light got really bright, as if they were looking into the window. Then the light went away and we never saw them again. Well, I tell people this story, they usually mention lightning balls, but these were almost sentient. They seemed to know where we were in the house, and both times lasted for about 20 or 30 minutes. This was at night and once during the winter, the original event, and once during the summer with my younger sisters. We still talk about it to this day, and my dad is still baffled, and he's the type of guy who knows a little bit about everything. Like him. I believe my dead relatives visit me in my dreams for prophetic reasons. I firmly believe that my dead relatives visit me in my dreams. I've had 3 separate occasions where I've had a dead relative tell me something in a dream and later found out that it was in fact true. First was when my great-uncle died. I was very close with him growing up, and since him and my great-aunt couldn't have children, I had a dream the night after he died. He told me the next person to die would be my grandmother, and that I needed to prepare myself for it, although it wouldn't be for a few years. He explained that it would be a mental disease that everybody would misdiagnose for years. This was weird in and of itself, and there were many other relatives who were sickly, but my grandma was healthy and strong. Sure enough, she was the next one to die. 5 years later, though. It was of Lewy body that was being misdiagnosed as Parkinson's. A few months later, my great-uncle came to me in a dream. I remember being in a completely other dream before he came to me. It was almost like a cut scene in a movie. I went from my previous dream directly to being in a white room with him yelling at me to wake up and call my mother. Ask her to check on his wife, my great-aunt. He was yelling really loudly, getting me that he needed me to wake up and I was the only person who would listen to their dreams. The crazy thing was that I was living in Hawaii at the time, and my family was in New York. I had no idea, but my mom was staying in a hotel down the road from my great-aunt that night. When I called her and found that out, I was completely taken aback. She rushed over to my great-aunt's place and found her passed out in the bathroom. She had fallen. This was the middle of winter in New York, and she had stayed in the cold bathroom for much longer. She probably wouldn't have survived. She lived for another 10 years and finally passed away at 100 years old from natural causes. Golf claps. Finally, my grandmother came to me when I was pregnant. I didn't find out if I was having a boy or a girl, but my grandmother told me it was a girl and showed me a photo album of her life. I'm so excited for who my daughter will become. It's amazing. I figured this was just a pregnancy dream and didn't think much about it, until I gave birth to the exact little girl I saw in my dream. I named her after my grandmother because of how powerful that dream was. In my dream, my grandmother made Jell-O, and I sat at her kitchen table and she told me about how my daughter will be so much like me that it'll shock me and everybody who knows me. Sure enough, my now 4-year-old is so much like me in personality, down to the picky palate I had at that age. My mother's surprised at the similarities. My husband is amazed that I can predict certain things my daughter will do or act like. The thing that sucks about all these is the only way to prove them is by my word. Anybody else have really weird prophetic dreams from people they love? Do you think that they're your guardian angels, or connection you have? I'd love to hear other people's dreams. Me too. That might be another channel at some point. (2004) Northwest Connecticut. Dear or. So I'll never forget this day as long as I live. It was around December 2004, maybe early 2005. It was near Burlington, Connecticut. My friend and I were driving around, ghost hunting, in air quotes. otherwise known as checking out cemeteries, and the Green Lady Cemetery. This was at night because we were edgy goth kids. Plus, it was a full moon, so why the fuck not? Anyway, we got turned around on some of those back roads and ended up in this weird woody area. It was winter. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, but not much, maybe a couple of inches or so. We're driving down this really crappy paved road with lots of potholes and our old-ass Honda going relatively slow. All of a sudden, a deer crosses the road in front of us. My friend who was driving brakes. We were only going about 25 or 30 miles an hour. The deer, no joke, stared past our headlights and right at us. And this deer was huge. I don't know how the heck you measure a deer, but I know horses, and they would say he was about 15 hands at his withers. His antlers were pretty average, nothing too pointy or dramatic, but he almost glowed in our headlights. It might have been the moon at that point, but it was seriously creepy. He stared at us for a solid minute before my friend turned off the headlights. The deer walked straight at the car, which caused us both to panic, turn the headlights on, and actually drive around the deer, which was still coming at the car. We drive away, not going much faster than 25 or 30. Potholes and suspension on the car be damned. I happened to look out the window, and no shit, the deer's fucking pacing us in the woods alongside us. It kept turning its head and looking at us. We must have been going at least 40 or 50 miles an hour. We panicked, but because the road conditions can't get much faster without crashing or really fucking up the car. Finally, 2 miles or so down the road, we come up on a brightly lit patch. It had a school and a decent enough intersection that required a stoplight. I see the deer peel off behind her car and run back down the middle of the road. I just learned a new word. Withers. Three knocks. My grandmother would always tell me about knocking she would hear either a few days before or moments before somebody close to her would pass away. It would usually be around 3 knocks. Not in any particular place. She said she would sometimes hear it at the door, behind the wall, or coming from outside. My grandmother had always kind of had this weird gift to see and experience things that I guess were paranormal, for lack of better words. She would always tell me her experiences, and me being not the bravest person on earth would get so scared I wouldn't be able to sleep for, days on end. I always thought the knocks were interesting whenever she told me about it, because not long after it usually happened. Somebody would sometimes die, or she would complain for days that she wasn't sleeping, and then the knocks would happen, as well as among other weird things. I was very open to the idea of these knocks, due to the fact that evidently people sometimes passed away. Last year, the 3 knocks happened to me. It was a Friday morning, and that entire week my grandmother's sister, Sari, was fighting COVID in the hospital. Sari was the second closest thing to a grandmother for me, so I had a great love for her. I wouldn't say we were close, but that was like as grandmotherly love that I could get, and she always given it to me. When I woke up, I was still between that state of being very sleepy, but also fully aware of my surroundings as I wasn't asleep. I know I had my back to the door of my room when I heard 3 faint but audible knocks on my door. I opened my mouth and I say, "Yes?" Then it hit me like a train that I heard absolutely no one walk around the door or open any of the doors that we had in the hallway. And trust me, I have the loudest family, so I should have heard somebody or something. My body froze and a chill went right down my back. For a good minute, I was too terrified to move. Laid in bed for a while to listen if anybody would maybe walk away or open the door to confirm it was indeed one of my family members. But no, nothing but silence after that. I even thought my brother was trying to scare me. I'm starting to see them again, and I'm getting really scared. To quickly preface my recent experiences, I believe it's important to know a few things. I'm a 27-year-old female. I've lived in my house going on 13 years. The house belongs to my maternal grandparents. My family moved in originally to help take care of my ill grandmother. She passed away 3 years ago, but we continue to stay and help take care of my grandfather now. My grandfather is the second person to have ever owned this house. The couple previously bought it when it was built in the 70s and only stayed for a few years before moving away. The point of all of this being that my house does not have an extensive history, since my family's more or less been the only people to ever have lived here. I've never liked living here. We moved in the end of my sophomore year of high school, and since day one I've always been uncomfortable. My home is a breeding ground for negativity. To avoid airing out the details of my family's personal issues, I'll just say that tension is always high in my house. People are constantly fighting and mental illness runs rampant in my bloodline. The air is just thick with aggression and suffocating amounts of stress all the time. It's no surprise to me that paranormal stuff happens. It started out with small things, like hearing somebody call my name when no one had, finding lights turned on when they were off, seeing things in the corner of my eye, items going missing and then appearing again suddenly, or feeling a cold chill on my back, like someone's behind me but nobody's there. Truthfully, I didn't pay too much mind to that stuff. I found it odd but not creepy enough to keep me up at night. Then 2013 happened. I started having insomnia all of a sudden. I've had bouts of insomnia before, but this was different. It was as if my body wouldn't let me sleep, like it was waiting for something. It started to be that late in the night, and I would smell something burning. Not like the campfire smell or the aroma of cooking, but like something was actively on fire. The first time I smelled it, I jumped up immediately and ran throughout my house to check and make sure nothing was burning down or, It's a small single-floor home with no basement, only a crawl space and an attic. So I ran through it quickly, checking every single room. I touched the walls and I touched the ceiling to feel for heat and nothing. There was nothing. I looked outside to check neighboring houses and our shed, all the while the intense smell of fire lingering in the air. But still, I saw nothing. The smell was so strong, I felt like I was choking on it. Until suddenly, after a few minutes, it was gone. This continued to happen for weeks straight. Every night the smell would come to me, and every night I would begin my routine of checking my house. I got so paranoid that something was actually going to be on fire that I wouldn't allow myself to just ignore it. I began doing nightly walks around the outside of my house to check every possible place for a fire, but never found a thing. About 2 weeks into my nightly walkthroughs, I began noticing these small sparks of light on the ceiling that would follow me through the rooms. The light was like a dying sparkler, small bursts of brightness that would travel above my head as I walked. The light didn't appear every night, and only manifested when I would smell the fire. The light also would never follow me into my room. And during this time, the frequency of whispers I would hear during the day and things going missing increased. I began hearing soft sighs and whimpers outside of my window at random times of the day. Not identifiable as an animal or person, but once again I would check with no discoveries. These activities, though weighing heavily on my mental well-being, they grew mundane and somewhat predictable. Things, however, grew worse in time, and I began seeing the people. The first was the little girl in my kitchen. One night, as I headed to grab myself a snack, and as I turned the corner to step into my dark kitchen, the clear figure of a girl stepped directly in front of me in the doorway. Although there were no recognizable features, I knew she was a child with long hair and wearing a dress from her silhouette. I'm only 4'10", and she was at least a full foot shorter than me. She approached me so closely and so suddenly, I gasped. I instantly reached for the light switch to my right, not breaking my eye contact with her dark shape. I watched her vanish right before me when I flickered the light on. Another was the man that stood in the corner of my room. I only started noticing him after the little girl, and for many nights I kept him in the corner of my eye, never daring to look directly at him. He wasn't there every night, and he wasn't there all the time. He wasn't there until he was. And he was there until he wasn't. There was no continuity in his appearances. He was only ever there when I was laying in bed, and almost always only in the far right corner of my room. Eventually I got the courage to look directly at him, and once again, no distinguishable features other than a masculine build, roughly 5'10" if I had to guess. And he wore a hat. When I'm laying down, my feet are in line with the door to my room directly in front of me, but his body was always angled perpendicular, facing the door rather than to me. Although his presence made me nervous, he never moved. Truthfully, the only one who terrified me was the man at the end of the bed. He frequented more than a little girl, but less than the man in the corner. I always felt him before I saw him. Looking at him made me dizzy, so I tried my best to keep my eyes closed until I felt he was gone. He was tall, slender, and the most distorted out of all of them. He always stayed at the foot of my bed, but it varied if he was directly in front of me or not. Occasionally he would lean over, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, but he was always staring at me. I don't like to think of him. It makes my stomach sink and my chest heavy. For months, in the year of 2013, my nights consisted of variations of all these events. A few times, all three would appear to me on the same night, and only once did the two men appear at the same time. But just as quickly as everything had begun, it had stopped. I didn't see them anymore. I didn't smell the fire or see the lights on my ceiling. I always have, and probably always will, hear these whispers. It's 2020 now. My life's changed so much since then. I put myself through many years of college, established my career, got a great job, and I've been saving for my future. But something has changed over the last 2 months. Due to the pandemic, I've been laid off, and I've spent the last month and a half almost entirely at home. About 3 weeks ago, I saw a little girl again, but this time, she was in the reflection of the mirror at the end of my hallway. The mirror is floor-to-ceiling in length. Though it was during the day, the hallway was dark. She was standing behind me in the reflection, but when I turned around, she wasn't there. Twice last week, a cool shiver running down the length of my spine woke me instantly from my sleep. Occasionally I'll feel this presence at the nape of my neck when I walk through my house. And just 3 nights ago I saw him again. When I sensed him at first, I thought I was going to pass out. My stomach turned and my vision blurred. But I finally allowed myself to look. There he was. Only this time, not at the end of my bed where I thought he would be, but on the side of me, much closer. I wanted to cry so badly, but was so frightened. I could only hold my breath for what seemed like an eternity. That's pretty long. And when I had felt that he is gone, I rushed to turn my lights on. I'm filled with nothing but dread and anxiety. Every night since then, I sleep with my lights on, and even though I'm doing everything in my power not to see them again, I can't help but notice when they're around. I don't know why they came to me last time, and I don't know why they're coming to me now. But most importantly, I don't know how to make it stop. You're the wrong one. I've always been sensitive, according to others, but I'm definitely more of a skeptic. My mom told me when I was around 6 she found me crying and clutching my side for no reason. And just to later find out that my grandmother broke her hip at the same time, more than an hour away. Stuff like that. Still, I'm not sure what I believe in regards to this type of thing. Well, flash forward to 2008, and I'm with my parents and brother on vacation. We knew my great-grandmother had been in the hospital for some time, but unknown to me, she had taken a turn for the worse. My dad, knowing she was very thin and weak and overall sickly looking, just decided to let us finish our vacation without worrying us. That way we could preserve how we remembered her, or whatever. The night before we were to go home, I had a strange dream. Unlike dreams where it's almost like playing a point-of-view video where you're unaware of yourself dreaming, I automatically knew I was dreaming, or at least not truly awake. I was surrounded on all sides by clouds, with a long, tall gate. Looking back, it was very much what a child would consider a Christian ideal of heaven. Using the same dreamy logic you often do, I began to follow the fence until I came to a break in the posts. As I walked toward the hole in the gate, I saw a shadow of a man. As I got closer, I recognized my great-grandfather, Nana's husband. He had died when I was very young, yet I was sure that it was him, and photos of him confirmed this later. He was looking outwards and didn't notice me approach. When he finally did see me, he became very, very angry, started trying to shoo me away. As he did, I heard him saying, "No, you need to go, you're the wrong one." I ran away and shortly after woke with my heart beating furiously. I lay there too old to run my parents with a nightmare, but too freaked out to sleep. The next thing I remember, my mom came to the room and I just told her gently that my Nana had passed that morning. Or rather, told me that. For weeks I was silent about it. Finally told my mom about my dream. She and many other members of my family called it a blessing that I dreamt of my great-grandfather waiting for my Nana to come for him at last. But it always made me very uneasy. Has anyone else had this type of dream or experience, or more sensitivity to loved ones getting hurt or dying? Oh yeah. Blue Campsite Ghost. In the late 90s, I went to an overnight girls' summer camp for a couple of weeks every year. It's a beautiful chunk of forest in Maine. This campground is structured like this. There's 2 roads that go up either side of a hill. Along the roads are paths that lead to clusters of cabins with each house of up to 4 girls. Each cabin cluster had a set of 3 porta potties, since the flush toilets were too far to walk, at least at night. There's a stone house foundation next to a cluster of cabins that's furthest into the woods. From now on, I'll be referred to as DW. I think they're supposing that stone house foundation is going to be referred to as DW. Actually, I've got no idea. I've heard a few spooky stories from DW, but never experienced any specifically there myself. My stories from when I stayed in the cluster of cabins next to the furthest one, from now on referred to as BP. This is going to get confusing. BP is situated where all the cabins are ways into the woods, and porta potties are between the cabins and the road that continues to DW. In fact, the porta potties are just at the edge of the road that continues to DW. One evening, my group of campers had come home on a bus field trip. It was later than we usually went to bed, and it was very dark. The most important rule at camp is the buddy rule. You never go anywhere without at least one other camper. Counselors were the only ones allowed to travel without buddies. After getting ready for bed, my cabin went to the porta potties. We were still energized from the trip, and we were very giggly. I glanced up to make sure that we weren't straying. Saw a person on the road walking toward DW. They were seemingly illuminated by a blue lantern flashlight. From my vantage point, the person was no longer visible once they walked behind the potties. I looked back to my friends and said something like, "We're probably freaking out whoever's on the road if they can hear us." And immediately my friends asked, "What person?" I answered, "There's a counselor going over to the DW. They're behind the porta potties." They didn't see anybody, and as we approached the potties, neither did I. The road was pitch dark in both directions, and so was the surrounding woods. There wasn't even a dark silhouette like if there was a lantern that had died and they continued walking anyway sort of a thing. There was nowhere that they could have gone, and they just vanished. I don't remember what the person looked to be wearing. All I remember is the blue light and the short, straight, almost shoulder-length light hair. Looking straight ahead, it was like they were walking toward DW and the house foundation. The campground used to be the site of some farmland, probably 100 years ago. I know this because the campground is crisscrossed by low, crumbling stone walls, and the farmhouse foundation in the DW. I fell in it once, but that's another silly story. I later learned the legend surrounding the foundation. It was a home to a small farming family, either one child, a boy or a girl, depending on who tells the story. One day when the father was away for market, the house burned with the other family members inside. He came home far too late, and some say that the skeletons found inside were holding each other, a mother trying to protect her children. My theory is that if I did indeed see a ghost, it may have been the ghost of one of the family members, and an echo type of ghost, repeating actions taken in the past. Ask Reddit. For some reason, this really resonated with me, and really created a vivid image in my mind. Like if a cat passes before their owner, they go to a purgatory like this, where under the right circumstances the owner can have a special visit with the cat in their dreams. This purgatory, in quotes, is an infinitely large library, one that has unimaginably many rows, aisles, and nooks and crannies. It's always quiet, save for the low hum of an air conditioner, and there's no people to be found. Outside, it's always twilight evening hours, irrespective of the passage of time, although I'm picturing lighting being something between a normal evening hour light that's seen in Black Panther where he visits his ancestors on the African plains. It's always a cool 62 degrees outside, and inside the library it's always cozy and comfortable. The soft glow of older incandescent bulbs casts no shadows. The carpeting is soft, and there's always that warm, cozy, stale paper smell of old books. The cat has everything he could possibly desire. Plenty of space and toys to run and chase, and infinite perfect napping spots. There's always food and water for the cat to enjoy. Plenty of room to hunt, stalk, nap, and hide. Time moves slowly, and the cat wants for nothing. The cats are all restored to perfect health as in the prime of their life, and yet something is still missing. All cats end up here, but it's so infinitely vast that there's rarely a time when more than 2 or 3 are congregated in one spot. Unless the cats have cat friends and they spend their time with them. People often picture a big open field on a sunny day as where dogs go, and they cross over the Rainbow Bridge. This library is where the cats go. At the time their owner passes, they're granted access to the library and are once again reunited with their beloved kitties. Once more, they get to curl up in front of the fireplace together, and then, only then, the cat and their person feel truly complete again. I love my cat so much. That is a very optimistic idea. I enjoy the bit about the air conditioner existing. and books being relevant. You're an odd one. I like you. Something tried luring me into dark rooms. When I was a kid, my mom and I lived with my grandparents in a 3-story house. It had a basement, a ground floor, and a second floor. To give context, there is a living room directly in front of the stairs leading upstairs. This way you could see my mom's room on the left, important for later, and my grandparents' room on the right. My room was further down the second-story hall, but I spent a lot of time alone and with my uncle in the basement. From our context, the basement was a huge rectangle with one room directly to the left of the stairs, my uncle's room, and one room in the far back left corner, storage room, also important for later. With context out of the way, time for the actual story. This all happened when I was around 8 or 9. Can't remember exactly, it was around when Halo 3 came out. The first time it happened is honestly the worst. I was homesick from school. In reality, I just wanted to play Halo. But everybody in the house worked, so I was alone and my uncle was at school and the only Xbox in the house was in the basement. So naturally, when everybody left, got up, went to go play Halo. Down there for a few hours playing games happily. And all of a sudden, the storage room I mentioned earlier creaks open ever so slightly. Not completely, just enough to see a slit of darkness, and plain as day I hear my mom call me from what sounded like the furthest corner of the storage room saying that she needed help putting something away. My mom wasn't home at the time, and I knew this. I didn't turn anything off. I bolted upstairs and laid on the couch until my uncle got home from school. He asked why I left Xbox on, and he thought I was sick and laughed at me. I just laughed back and said, "My bad, it won't happen again." The only other time this happened was actually during a family dinner. We had cousins over and pretty much our entire family over for a holiday. My cousins and I were playing with Nerf guns in the living room. They got hungry and went to get more food, so I sat by myself in the living room. I was reloading my magazines with darts when something caught my eye upstairs. Same year as the last encounter, I'm still 8 or 9 in this scenario. It was my mom's room door. It had opened, and because it was like 8 p.m., it was dark upstairs. No one was up there, so no lights were on, but my mom had walked out from the darkness and kind of waved me over to her and a weird smile on her face, too. I yelled to her, "Why?" And she just kept waving me over. But I clearly saw my mom, so I didn't question her again and started walking over, but as I got to the start of the stairs, I looked to my right. I saw my mom talking with my aunt at the dinner table. Walked over and asked if she had been upstairs. She said no. Went back to the living room, looked up the stairs, and her doors were closed again. Nothing like that ever happened again, but it still gives me the chills when I think about it. Night Visitor. I don't really talk about this much. It's passed through my head a time or two, so here we go. This happened 40 years ago. I was 10 living with my mom. My brother had moved to California, so it was just Mom and yours truly. It was late one night on a weekend, probably Saturday night. Anyway, Mom had gone to bed, and I was in my room trying to get some sleep. Not much luck. My room was dark, but could still make out the objects in the room. Usually I keep my closet door closed. It's one of those sliding doors, but it was open this night. I'm laying down in bed kind of looking toward the closet door, and that's when I see it. At first I thought it was my hoodie, then it moved, floating out of the closet. I was terrified not knowing what I was seeing. It was coming closer and it felt hard to breathe, and being a kid, I pulled the blankets over my head hoping whatever it was would just go away. I waited for what seemed like forever, and I finally got the courage to look out from under the sheets. Dude, that was a bad idea. It was floating to me. It looked like a black cloaked figure. It wasn't very tall, but I couldn't see in their feet or hands. It didn't have a face either. It came closer. Scared out of my mind, I closed my eyes, praying for it to go away. Opening my eyes, I see it right there by my bed, looking at me, sort of with no face. I stopped just breathing out of fear. Then it bent toward me, to my face, looking at me. Next thing I know is I hear a squealing sound. And yeah, it was your narrator screaming you-know-what off. You are the writer. I'm the narrator. You were screaming. This figure backs up toward the closet and vanishes. I'm screaming bloody murder for my mom. She comes and checks on me. I frantically tell her what happened, and she didn't believe me. I mean, who would, right? I don't sleep that night. The next day I get up and have breakfast and go hang out and play with my friends, forgetting about the previous night's occurrence. It gets late, and street lights come on, so I haul ass home. I have dinner with my mom, and a few hours later we get ready for bed. I say goodnight and I go to my room. Then suddenly it all comes roaring back. The unknown floaty thing. It makes me uneasy. I try to push it out of my mind, figuring to maybe watch some TV before bed. So I watch till I get sleepy and give up and go to sleep. While I'm laying there, I notice that the closet is open. Oh, crap! I try on, blow it off, and not thinking anything about it, that's when it happens. The visitor returns, floating over to me just like before. I'm so scared, but it's then that I do something unexpected. Off the floor by my bed, I pull out a toy machine gun. You know, the kind of pull the trigger and ready, tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. I draw down on this entity and open fire. It pauses in the middle of the room, still looking at me, and backs up and disappears, kind of like a fade-out type of situation. Whatever it was, it didn't come back as far as I know. I still don't know what it was or what it, really looked like. I didn't really get to know. I just wanted to share my story with you. So, there it is. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Ask Reddit. When I was about 13, we lived in a really old house that was on a farm. One time my parents were out really late. Me and my brother were the only ones home. I was sitting in the living room and my brother went to go get a drink of water or something. My kitchen was next to another sort of living room. Living room number 2, you could say. It had a sort of bar on the side with a big window cut into the wall. That way you could see into the kitchen from living room number 2. All these rooms are very small. So when my brother left living room number 1, I saw him stop dead in his tracks in living room number 2, facing the bar looking into the kitchen. He walked back in and I asked what happened. He said he saw a black figure with glowing red eyes. Me and my brother used to love ghost hunting and stuff like that, but I can tell when he's seriously scared. So a few weeks later, my brother had a friend over. He left the room to go grab his bag in living room number 1. He came running back into the room and said, "Dude, I saw a black shadow in the kitchen with red eyes." I immediately suspected my brother was trying to mess with me. So I looked at him and I said, "Shut up, stop." Laughed it off. But my brother's friend asked what I was talking about. My brother swore on our dead dog. That was something we didn't mess with. That he never told anyone except me. That house has a lot of creepy feelings to it, and negative energies. We had about 7 pets die in that house. Never looked back when we left. Ask Reddit. When I was 17, I had 3 sleep paralysis episodes over about a week. I have a really crappy memory, but I remember them more vividly than about anything from high school. I'm in my early 20s, so not too long ago. I had some weird sleep issues back then. It was pretty common for me to have awkward transitions into sleep. I'd get stuck in that half-asleep phase, leading to a lot of hypnagogic hallucinations. Mostly auditory. This is roughly what happens during sleep paralysis. You go straight to REM sleep before you're fully asleep instead of transitioning through normal sleep cycles. In REM sleep, your brain basically paralyzes your body so that you can dream without acting your dreams out. Without going into too much detail, here's the summary of the experiences. I'm falling asleep one night when suddenly I become aware of all of this in the fraction of a second. 1. I can't move. Not a muscle. I can feel my brain telling my body to move, but my body's not responding. This is terrifying by itself. 2. I can see the room I'm in despite sleeping on my stomach with the space buried in my pillow. There's no way I can explain this, as it was truly an out-of-body experience. But it's especially confusing because I'm simultaneously in my body trying to move. Now the room is exactly the same as it was a few minutes before and I closed my eyes. It's not different or weird like when you remember something to be once you wake up from a dream. Large bunk room with many of my friends asleep. We were in a cabin out in the woods, I think. The same exact placements of everything. I can even see my friends asleep. Same dimensions, lighting, etc. 3. There's a dark figure on the side of the room. It's not like a silhouette dark, it's absence of light dark. And I know for a fact that it's evil and that I'm in danger. Please hear me out, that I'm not saying just felt scared, like I knew I was in danger. How you might feel if you were crossing the road and suddenly turned and knew you were about to get hit by a truck scared. And then, it starts walking toward me. I lay there paralyzed, fighting for my life to move as it kind of comes closer and closer. Finally, it approaches my bed, reaches down, touches my back. I can feel the pressure on my back, but only for a moment as I finally break through the paralysis and I can move again. I turn over, jump back into my bed with my back to the corner of the room, expecting to see something right there. But it's completely gone. What's so frightening, though, is that I don't feel like I just woke up from a dream. Or even that I even woke up. I'm still looking at the same unchanged room that I'd been when I was paralyzed. Somehow, some way, I was finally overcome by sleep about half an hour later. The exact same experience happened 2 more times over the next 4 days. The only difference being that the figure only made it to the foot of my bed. The second time, barely got a few feet the first time. Now what's so frightening about this when you research it, is that people have been experiencing this phenomenon for centuries, with so many people mentioning an evil being and the sensation of pressure on the chest and back when beings are touching them. Believe what you want, but I'm pretty decided at this point. This is a being, or these beings are demons. I'll admit that I'm a Christian, so my go-to explanation of paranormal evil is demons. But I'm not really sure what else to believe. I just can't buy into the explanation that it's all in my head, not after that experience, nor the countless similar experiences people have had for centuries. I believe we may be extra vulnerable when we're in that state. Whether it's our body or soul that's vulnerable, I don't know. But that's why we get attacked by something that's pure evil. Ever since the Insidious movies, or rather, ever seen the Insidious movies, yeah, they basically operate off the same assumption I'm making. Ask Reddit. Anyway, a few years back when I was just out of school, my grandmother got really sick. They transferred her to hospice and our family took shifts washing her. You know, spending time with her before the end and making sure that she always had someone there if she needed anything. My mother and I were spending the night and I just started acting weird. Like super hyper and antsy. My mom was reading my grandmother's book and she eventually fell asleep. Mom kept reading just to make sure. I'm listening to music, trying to calm myself down because everything feels electric, if that makes sense. I look over and there's this shadow man. He crawls down the wall and just sits at the base. I keep watching him, trying not to freak out because my mom and grandmother are right there and my mom doesn't seem to notice. So I point at it and tell her about the shadow man. My grandmother's asleep at this point. She asks me what's wrong with me. I just keep pointing and trying to describe this thing I'm seeing. She gets a little freaked and asks me if it's there for Grandma. I reply, "No, it's here for the man down the hall." I kept watching the shadow man until he left. Told my mom he was gone. Minutes later, a male resident down the hall died. I had no clue about any other residents at the hospice, and there were no nurses running around or anything like that would have tipped me off to this. Needless to say, both of us were super freaked out after that. Ask Reddit. That reminded me of when I was about 9 or 10-ish. I lived on an acreage in PEI. Shared a driveway with the neighbors that lived behind us. To the left of our house was a fenced-in little yard with a little field that we owned. We had built a shed on it. Then a farmer's field, then just swampland. Behind our house was the neighbors, and behind them was swamp and forest. To the right was thick brush, and in front of our house was the highway. Then a farmer's field, then more forest and swamp. There were a few farms nearby, but nothing within reasonable walking distance. My dad is an artist, and used to have a shop that he would sell his art from. He mostly painted seashells or old slate shingles. He had a pile of these shingles behind the shed. I also used to dig behind the shed, so I was familiar with the pile of slate. One day I was just fooling around outside, not really doing anything, but as the sun started to go down, I started to feel eerie. I couldn't place what was wrong. It was like somebody was watching me. Can't remember why, but I could just feel a presence behind the shed. I had the fight or flight feeling, but I was completely frozen, staring at this shed. I tried to look under it, but couldn't see anything from how far away I was. I was just about to give up and go inside, and I noticed something move in the grass. It was like a few feet away from me. Immediately, I assumed it was a toad, because we had so many and I loved catching them. Went to check out the road and immediately froze when I noticed it was a piece of slate. Something must be back there. I threw a piece of slate toward me. I grabbed a screwdriver to defend myself, ran for the house where I told my parents there was a robber, only thing that made sense in my head, but they didn't believe me. I knew it couldn't be the neighbors because 1, their son was in the military and not home at the time, and 2, they sometimes fostered children but they didn't have any at that time, and 3, they were older, kind of fat, and really friendly, so it would have been completely out of character for them. Ask Reddit. I was staying with my grandparents for a week or two over the summer break years ago during school years. It was a nice summer day outside, fairly warm, with no wind at all. My grandparents were going into town to pick up something for supper. Asked if I wanted to come, but I wanted to stay behind. Anyway, they were gone for a little bit. I was sitting in my grandfather's recliner in the living room, drawing or reading. Can't remember which one it was. As I sat there, I suddenly felt this cool, gentle breeze along my cheek and on my neck, and I suddenly smelled a really strong smell of perfume. It was so strong that it was as if somebody had dumped out a bottle of perfume on the coffee table in front of the chair or something. I jumped up and looked around for a source. Couldn't see anything, so worth noting that there was no perfume anywhere near where I was in the house. All the windows in the living room were shut. When I jumped up and looked for a source of the breeze and smell, I felt incredibly uneasy. Unexplainably so. I just didn't feel safe. So I got the hell outside, stayed on the front deck for several minutes until it calmed down. Went back inside, I opened all the living room windows and turned the TV on and just tried to get myself back to normal. Worth noting, I slept right above the kitchen in the guest bedroom, and I'd hear noises downstairs late at night sometimes. Sounded like footsteps and things being moved around in the kitchen. I remember telling my grandmother once, but she said that the house was just old and settling at night. I knew what she meant by that, but it's not what I'd like to hear at night. It literally sounded like there was somebody snooping around. Some nights I felt afraid to try to fall asleep because I felt like I was being watched, but I never saw anything in the room with me. To make this go from 10% creepy to at least 50% creepy, they lived right across the road from a very old and large cemetery at the time. Also, my mother used to say that when she was younger and still lived at home, it's the same house she grew up in, by the way, she would hear footsteps coming from downstairs. After they moved into the house of my grandfather's uncle when he passed away, I stayed with them for another summer or two before I grew out of it, quote-unquote. Never had any issues at all with the new house. Not ever. Ask Reddit. I didn't have much time to react, honestly. I was driving on the left-hand lane of a 4-lane road separated by a median. I was taking a slight curve and it was dusk, so by the time I noticed 2 lights where they really shouldn't have been, we were making contact. I probably had a half-second flash of cohesive thought before impact, but I do remember the impact pretty vividly. I closed my eyes, which must have heightened my senses a bit. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard, and it felt like it lasted an eternity. There was a little moment where I opened my eyes and had no idea what to expect, so I kind of looked at my legs and my arms to see what was left of me. I could see that the car was all torn up, front was just gone. I remember wondering where it all went. Why wasn't it all pushed into the cabin into me? I tried to put the car into park so it would just, wouldn't keep rolling. I was still kind of laughed thinking about that. Then I had this overwhelming sense of dread. I thought I heard something spilling. I was afraid the fuel would maybe ignite and explode. Couldn't open the driver door at first, but I leaned into it with my shoulder and swung out. Took the seatbelt off, swung my legs out, and booked it. I saw across the street one of those neighborhood monument signs with shrubbery around it. Jogged across the median toward that. In retrospect, I didn't even look to see if traffic was oncoming in either direction. I don't remember looking back until I got to that sign. I didn't even see the other vehicle, but I felt like I needed to lie down on my back and try to control my breathing. Found out later that the other driver was confused and thought she was in the correct lane of a 2-lane road. She didn't see the median when she turned out from an office building. The damage to the back half of my vehicle came from her car ricocheting around. I was carrying a 100-pound guitar amp in the back that literally cracked in half. Ask Reddit. 2 short stories. 1. Walked into my sister's room at night when I was 5, turned on the light, suddenly everything around me just went completely white. It was like I was standing in a bright void with no house or furniture or anything. A black silhouette of a woman started walking toward me. It looked like a chubby older woman in a bathrobe with curly hair. I freaked the fuck out, turned the light switch back off almost immediately. Everything went back to normal. Ran, told my mother about it, but she just brought me back to the room and turned the light switch on and off a few times to show me that it was just my imagination. I still don't know what would have caused me to experience something like that. 2. Broad daylight, same house from the first story. Probably around noon or something. It was like 9. Our house was a bungalow that had a long hallway with 3 bedrooms. Mine near the start and my sister's in the middle. 1 door leading to the basement and then a bathroom at the end in my parents' bedroom. I went to take a piss, and when it came out, I saw this giant glowing purple thing slowly moving out of my room. It was very tall and had glowing red eyes. Its body looked sort of slimy, but it was humanoid-shaped and almost resembled someone wearing a cloak. It turned and stared at me for a second and then slowly turned the corner of the hallway and into the kitchen. Stood there shitting myself for a bit before I got the courage to try and follow it. But when I went into the kitchen, there was nothing there. And to this day, I don't know what the fuck that was about. It wasn't like it was dark or even spooky. I wasn't tired at all, so I don't think I was having a dream. The fact that it was coming out of my room scared the shit out of me. It wasn't a particularly old house either, and the person who owned it before was an old unmarried man. So it's not like any of the ghosts could have been his wife. There was a murder that happened across the street to this Korean couple a few years before he moved in, but neither of them were particularly chubby, so I'm not sure if that's possibly related. Ask Reddit. I was at a hospital to pick up a body once. One of the workers stopped to ask me if I'd ever seen someone from the other side, as they put it. I was like, huh? Like the other side of the hospital? Most hospitals only have one morgue. She was like, no, the other side. And I was like, the other side of town? Because there is another funeral home with a similar name operating on the other side of town, and I was like, oh no. That other mortuary has a similar name, but we're not associated with them. She kept asking a couple more times, talking about this other side. It took me way too long to realize what she was talking about. Ghosts. Then another time a nurse stopped me and was like, I would love to stay at a funeral home overnight and just sip tea and wait in the dark and see if I see any ghosts. I just said that she would end up incredibly bored and have to pee. Then there was this security guard who fully went off. Went off about some book he had just read about people with near-death experiences who'd seen the afterlife and all this shit about how angels are real. Me and my partner I was with, who was just a 19-year-old kid, just had to smile and nod and lie about how we would definitely check it out. Recently I was working with him, the security guard, and mentioned that we had been getting a lot of young cases recently, like people in their 20s. He tried to convince me it was because they were probably vaccinated, but I was like, no, almost all of them died in car accidents except for the one girl that committed suicide. But he didn't seem convinced and just kept urging me to not get vaccines. So to answer the question, no. The closest I've ever gotten to a ghost is kooky hospital staff pestering me about it. Ask Reddit. In 2014, my best friend and roommate passed away from an accidental OD. He basically just fell asleep. There's a ton of weird stories around this, but this one is the oddest, I'd say. The day he died holds a lot of mystery. I'm the last person, or we think, to see him alive that morning. I know I saw him. We didn't find him until later that evening. Rigor mortis had set in. 911 called, the whole ordeal. After the coroner took him away, my uncle came and drove my then significant other and I to their apartment about an hour away. On that drive, I got quite an earful. I don't know what you know about Middle Eastern families, but let me tell you, empathy isn't their strong suit, especially when drugs are involved. Once at their home, my significant other and I go on the balcony to smoke some weed and just calm some nerves. We cry and I ask her, want me to go grab you some water? She says yes. I go to the fridge to serve a cup of water. It was like in a movie, opening the door to the fridge, not being able to see what's on the opposite side. You finish your task, shut the door, and there he was. My friend that had passed earlier that day was standing right next to me for a split second. I see him with clothing I'd seen him wear years before. His face was as it was before, but his horrible car accident 7 years prior to his death. I still hold on to that mental image to just remind myself what it all means. why I do what I do. After reading the answers here, I hope to see him or others when I pass. UK-based cult. Similar to another post that was just made, my sister and I were young. We came into contact with a group of women from the UK that referred to themselves, at least online, as Sibsi Gra. It was heavily tied into an ARG, an alternate reality game. It took place on a number of scattered forums and Wikipedias. Had it been left at that, then it would have been just some meaningless internet escapism. But we noticed some weird patterns. The people in question were very interested in getting the younger participants in the game to move to the UK. They were into the occult and black magic, specifically variations of theistic and violent types of satanic practice akin to the Order of Nine Angels, another UK-based, particularly nasty occult group. At the time, they provided photographic evidence of some pretty shady activity that they would get up to if they got to the UK. My sister and I agree now as adults that a lot of the behavior we witnessed is similar in character to cult grooming, and the result of this in our lives, both normal and paranormal, have been obvious to us since that time. We're looking for information related to this topic, or to these people, to figure out if it's something other people know about, or if we were just, gaslit hard by a group of people pretending to be a well-connected satanic cult. Any information is appreciated. And if you get any more information about that, you message me. Anybody who's still around, see ya.